إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولقد خلقناكم ثم صورناكم ثم قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم فسجدوا إلا إبليس لم يكن من الساجدين. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise, glory and majesty belongs to Allah Azza wa Jalla alone. And we ask Him to send His greatest peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, upon his companions, and upon all the believers until the Day of Judgment. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran what means in English, and we have certainly established you upon the earth, and made for you therein ways of livelihood. Little are you grateful. And then in the ayah afterwards in Surah Al-A'raf, He says, indeed we have created you, then we shaped you and formed you. Then we said to the angels, prostrate to Adam. So they all prostrated except Iblees. He was not from those who prostrated. In the world we live today, and indeed since time began for human beings, from Adam until now, we've always faced the dichotomy. We've always faced the contradictions between those who are devils and those who are angels. The two ends of the spectrum of how we can interact with Allah Azza wa Jalla. But it wasn't always that. And what's interesting is Allah Azza wa Jalla states the moment in which Iblees, the chief of the shaitans, decided to abscond and remove himself from being of the rank of the angels. Iblees was a person who was so righteous, it was said that there wasn't a place in the universe except that he worshipped Allah inside it. Iblees was a person that was so close, Allah didn't differentiate between him, who is from jinn, made of fire, and the angels who are made from light. Iblees was someone so close, he was able to speak to Allah directly, entered into the court of the angels, and able to roam the heavens freely before Allah Azza wa Jalla. But yet, somebody of such high stature, someone who all of us would say and recognize, as Allah Azza wa Jalla recognized in the Quran, reached a closeness to Allah Azza wa Jalla that none of us in this world will experience. But yet this person who rose to such ranks fell to become what we now describe the worst of creation. Studying Iblees and studying this incident opens up a wealth of knowledge and understanding of how we ourselves can prevent the same thing happening to ourselves. Many people, Bishr al-Hafi amongst others, described how their years of obedience and worship, people who are recognized by their contemporaries as being saints, people who Imams like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal used to study with, Bishr al-Hafi, would say, I fear for myself that I might enter into hellfire. I fear for myself that all my worship will be seen as nothing before Allah Azza wa Jalla on the Day of Judgment compared to the sins that I have reaped. So what is it that differentiates between angels and demons? What is it that makes us verge towards being angelic compared to taking the path of Iblees? Because both of them start in the same way. And indeed, perhaps we're both on the same trajectory, obeying Allah, following Him and loving Him in the way that both the angels and Iblees did at that time. When we read the story within the Quran, Allah begins with an interesting point. He begins with the creation of Adam when recounting the story. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ صَوَّرْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. He created you, and then He formed you. And then He told the angels to prostrate to Adam. Now what's interesting is Allah Azza wa Jalla is talking about human beings in the plural sense here. He's saying we created you in plural. Kum in Arabic is a pronoun that's attached to describe the plurality. But yet the prostration happened to Adam alayhi salam. What's created here by Allah Azza wa Jalla is a contrast between the point and the underlying kind of crux as to what caused Iblees to divert from the path. It wasn't that he had an issue specifically with Adam, but it was that he saw this rivalry with human beings. He saw that how can these people be created which are made from a more lowly material and rise to be people who the angels are prostrating for them. It's that craving for attention, that desire to be seen, something we're plagued with in our day and age. People wish to become famous on YouTube, YouTubers. People wish to become social media influencers. Everybody with a social media hashtag or handle feels their need to express their voice and state their opinion. And Iblees was no different. When he saw a single person, he accounted and thought about the plurality, he thought about everybody and how he can suddenly become and disappear within that ranks. Then Allah Azza wa Jalla begins the story, and this is where we want to begin to compare the actions of the angels with the actions of Iblees and understand specifically what Iblees did in order for us to be able to understand how we can avoid such a situation. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. Now what I want you to notice now is the length of which this recitation happens. فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. The length of the verse creates the atmosphere that you feel within that setting. Imagine the number of angels standing before Allah in that moment. Imam Umar Sulaiman has a beautiful series on angels within our midst. The series that ran through Ramadan, and I recommend you listen to it. But in there he gives you just a brief understanding of just the sheer number of angels that Allah created. It's described that every raindrop falls has an angel. If every human being has 8 angels, and there are billions that have ever lived, if there are angels that are carrying the throne of Allah, angels created purely to prostrate, angels created purely to go down and bow to Allah Azza wa Jal, all these angels in their trillions and trillions, imagine a setting of all of them standing before Allah Azza wa Jal, and amongst them was Iblees. Allah Azza wa Jal orders them to prostrate, and all of them in unison obey Allah Azza wa Jal, except for Iblees. Now we've all seen that picture, the Nazi salutes, where all of them are saluting Hail Hitler, and one person is crossing their arm. It stands out, it's clear that one person is clearly absconding from the reality. Now of course, the reality is maybe not the best analogy, because Allah is not like the Nazis, but the example I want to give is how a person standing alone amongst a crowd who are all doing the same thing becomes such a visual eyesore. Notice the length, as I mentioned. فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. Allah Azza wa Jal didn't just make this a quick prostration, it was a prolonged prostration, allowing Iblis the opportunity to join in. Perhaps he might change his mind. Perhaps he would be unfair if it was just an instant prostration and he didn't join in. But he gave that length of time, also creating that length of awkwardness. When a person absconds from the group, and he does so for a prolonged period of time, sometimes just the time makes them feel humiliated, so that they return to Allah. They return to the group. But in this instance, Iblis was so firm upon his arrogance, he continued. He remained in his place. فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. He remained disobeying Allah, despite the millions and billions and trillions of angels all doing the same thing. لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. At this point, Allah Azza wa Jal, in His infinite mercy, begins to converse with Iblees. Allah Azza wa Jal already knows the realities that are in his heart, and already knows the actions he's done and will do and continue to do. But yet He affords him the opportunity to be able to explain himself. Iblees says, قَالَ مَا مَنَعَكَ أَلَّا تَسْجُدَ إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. He says, what prevented you from prostrating when I ordered you, when I commanded you? Iblees responded, قَالَ أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْهُ خَلَقْتَنِي مِنْ نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِنْ طِينٍ. He said, I am better than him. I am greater than him. You created me from fire and you created him from clay. Now, before I go into the details of that, it's important for us to understand the role of questions in our faith. Indeed, the angels themselves are recalled by Allah Azza wa Jal as questioning one of the actions that He wishes to do. Allah Azza wa Jal says in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah Azza wa Jal says, remember when your Lord said to the angels, I will create on earth a Khalifa, a vicegerent. They ask Allah, قَالُوا أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. They said, will you create on earth somebody who will spread corruption and spread bloodshed? What's interesting is we know theologically from the Quran and from what the Prophet taught us is that angels cannot disobey Allah Azza wa Jal. So the question comes, how are the angels able to question Allah in this instance? If a question in itself was a bad thing, if you are unable and discouraged from asking questions in our faith, why did the angels ask a question to Allah Azza wa Jal? In fact, why are they asking Allah something in this instance that's seemingly contradicting something He wishes to do? The importance is in the nuance and in the details. Because the angels in this instance are not questioning a command of Allah, but rather they're seeking to understand the rationale behind Allah's command. Allah Azza wa Jal hasn't told them to do anything, but He's informing them of the reasons behind it. And when the angels ask their question, they're asking their question inquisitively. Compare that to how Iblees questioned Allah Azza wa Jal. The same action, the same thing, but his intent, his reasoning behind Allah Azza wa Jal's order was different. Iblees asked Allah and questioned Allah's command arrogantly. He was not inquisitive, seeking to understand the rationale behind Allah's judgment. Just like the angels questioned the creation of human beings. The angels had seen before people spreading mischief, people killing one another. And they questioned, why would another human being be created in order to do the same thing? When we ask our questions, we have to be angelic in the way we ask them. We have to ask them seeking to find the truth, seeking to be inquisitive and learn more about the wisdoms behind Allah Azza wa Jal. We shouldn't ask a question with a prior agenda in our mind. You see this often with young people. They'll come to you and they'll say, Mom, yeah? And you go, well, do you know how my friend Steve got a PlayStation for his birthday? Of course, she knows why he got it. But the reason they're asking the question is in order to imply, well, maybe you can buy one for me. There's a hidden motivation behind it. When we ask our questions to our scholars and imams, it's important to ask questions. Angels couldn't disobey Allah, but yet they were afforded the ability to ask a question. And a good question is described by scholars as half of knowledge. Being able to pry into and understand something deeply, and then return to the teacher and ask them a question, is of the utmost importance in our faith, contrary to what some people would have you believe. But the thing that's important is asking, why am I asking this question? And am I willing to accept the answer once it's received? The angels obeyed regardless of their own personal wishes. When Allah said prostrate, they prostrated without hesitation. But Iblees remained upon what he felt he was right. And that's when the questioning and the doubt became manifest. So Allah has this conversation, affording him the opportunity that perhaps he might change. قال ما منعك ألا تسجد إذ أمرتك. He said, what prevented you from prostrating when I ordered you? He said, I am better than him. خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. Nothing could be more poignant in today's society, in the lives that we're in, the protests that we're living at the moment of Black Lives Matter, than this verse right here. How can anything as superficial as the color of our skin determine our superiority? That very thinking is thinking from the devil. Iblees believed in Allah Azza wa Jal. He was speaking to Allah Azza wa Jal. He was in the court of the angels. He couldn't have been in a better place. He was worshipping Allah every day of his life until that moment. But when it became clear that his racism within him, this discrimination that was within his heart, all his actions before became nothing. Worthless before Allah Azza wa Jal. Now when we as Muslims are confronted with the same reality, when we're asked the very same questions, uncomfortable, you may have been praying Ramadan, fasting Ramadan every year your whole life, praying every salah 5 times a day. You may be the best of the best amongst all your peers and people see you for your righteousness. But if in your heart you have even an ounce of racism when put to the test. Now Iblees wasn't asked, what do you think of Adam? He wasn't asked, do you have any human friends? He was asked to act in accordance with the beliefs that Allah wanted him to have. The prostration was a manifestation that he submitted, not to Allah because he already submitted to Allah Azza wa Jal, and of course it was a submission to his order. But this moment when Iblees is prostrating, he's showing that he's submitting himself, who's this, he sees to be this greater creation, this creation from fire, is submitting to one he sees to be lower than him. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, may Allah be pleased with him, a great companion of Allah, a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, once had an argument with our master Bilal. And in that moment, he called him out and said, "O son of a black woman." Sayyidina Bilal went and complained to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ said a sentence to Abu Dharr, which transformed his life. He said, "Innaka mru'un fika al-jahiliyyah," that inside you, you still have an element of ignorance. Even this great lofty status that you've acquired, this tremendous legacy that you've left, in that moment, you still have this element of ignorance within you that you need to cleanse. Now, unlike Iblees, Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, may Allah be pleased with him, put his head down on the floor and he asked for Bilal to stand on his head to show the lowliness of his discrimination compared to the loftiness of Bilal's way of conducting himself. To show that black or white, red or yellow, regardless of your color, the only ranking that matters is how close you are to Allah. That prostration that Iblees was asked to make was a prostration to recognize his own inferiority, his own rather equality before all of those in creation. We can extend this example to our own lives. Do we differentiate between our lives and the lives of the animals around us? Do we differentiate between our lives and the lives of the environment? Because everything in the creation makes tasbih of Allah Azza wa Jal. And if we are taking advantage of our environment and we're not looking after the environment, as we've been placed by Allah to be custodians of this earth, then we ourselves see ourselves as arrogant, that we can have this whole earth serve us and we can destroy it without any care in return. Iblees in that moment says that he is better than Adam, from something as superficial as the color of his skin, or in this case, the makeup of his body. His arrogance wasn't just something that he born and said, "This is what I believe," but rather he continued to justify it with logic. He says, "خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ." We see Iblees, when confronted by Allah, he comes to him with an argument. He comes to him with what he feels to be my point of view. Now this is where, as Muslims, we have to be very clear with how we approach truth. Nowadays, just because someone has an opinion, they have an entitlement to have a truth. This statement, speak your truth, in itself feels nonsensical. There is only one truth, the truth of Allah Azza wa Jal and the laws which He's manifested. If a person believes that Islam allows us to drink alcohol, regardless of what his truth is not true with Allah Azza wa Jal. If a person believes that Islam allows them to have a girlfriend, regardless of what they think, it's not the truth of Allah Azza wa Jal. Iblis came to him with his truth. He felt this is the reason, and it seems sensible. Fire bakes clay. Fire seems more virtuous than clay. It's a logical, rational argument. But yet, Allah knew what He made Adam from. And He knew what He made Iblis from. And Allah, in His infinite wisdom, whether you understand it or not, you must obey Him. Allah knows that from the loins of Sayyidina Adam will come our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. From the loins of Sayyidina Adam will come you and I, who worship Allah Azza wa Jal, out of our free volition. Allah knows that many righteous people will come from our beloved Prophet Adam, who himself was a prophet and close to Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah knows that it's our actions that matter. And even if he or you or I am unable to understand that logic is still sound. And what we have to do is submit to Allah and allow ourselves to understand it later. When we get a command of Allah Azza wa Jal, when we're told that we cannot do this or we can do this, whether it's to wear the hijab as a female, or whether it's being told that it's sunnah to grow the beard as a man, you may feel that's a superficial action. You may feel that, no, Islam is in my heart. And actually, it's important that my heart and I beloved Allah and this isn't important. But Allah has commanded it. And this is something scholars have encouraged people to do. If not saying that this is from the obligations for people. Then we submit our own judgment and we obey Allah. We can continue to question and continue to ask and seek knowledge from those who ask us. But our command from Allah Azza wa Jal is enough for us to see that we obey it. Because we know that Allah Azza wa Jal, when He tells us to do something, He's only telling us to do something for our own benefit. Did Allah benefit when Iblis prostrated to Adam? Of course not. But He's telling Iblis to prostrate in order to destroy this arrogance within him. In order to remove this arrogance that would stop him going into paradise. Who is it that's going to benefit from this act? With all his logic and all his understanding, Iblis got it wrong. Because he didn't see the bigger picture which Allah tells us to do. So when we are told by Allah to pray even Dhuhr Salah in school, Allah showed you throughout this whole lockdown, you can pray Dhuhr, there's nothing wrong with it. Now when you go back to school, are you going to continue praying Dhuhr on time? Or are you going to say, school is difficult, where can I pray? You have to find a way. Where it's work, are you going to pray when you're back at work? Are you going to find the time to pray Dhuhr and fit lunch around it and fit that work meeting? Or are you going to say, it's difficult, I need to make my living? Regardless of what your argument is, Allah always has a reason. And Allah's reason takes in all factors into account. In this conversation, we finished with one more thing. And this is perhaps one of the most interesting parts of this sentence, this conversation. Iblis finishes this discussion with a request from Allah. He says, قَالَ أَنظِرْنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. Now let's repaint this scenario. Iblis is standing before the angels and Allah Azza wa Jal. He's just visibly disobeyed Allah Azza wa Jal in front of trillions of angels. He was given ample time to follow suit, even if he was just doing it out of shyness. But he insisted on his arrogance. He disobeyed Allah. Iblis in that moment chose to make a dua to Allah. He asked Allah for what? Now you can ask Allah for, I don't know, a PlayStation. You can ask Allah for a car. You can ask Allah for a nice house. Iblees asked for the most extraordinary thing. He asked for him to be able to live until the final day. Now, this dua has so much meaning to unpack. Firstly, Allah answered the dua of a sinner who didn't just sin, he sinned in front of Allah, whilst seeing and hearing Allah, in front of a setting where everyone else, it's very difficult for you to sin in a setting where everyone is doing a good thing. You have to intentionally go against the grain. And in that moment, when he was told to repent, he didn't even repent. But yet he asked Allah, and Allah granted it for him. Allah answered his dua. Think about that. It's the most amazing and perhaps most majestic thing to understand Allah's mercy. Because in that setting, you'd think he'd be thrown out. Perhaps thrown straight into hellfire for that act of arrogance in front of the court of Allah. But in that moment, Allah chose to forgive him. Allah chose to answer his dua. And it wasn't just for something small, it was something fantastical. Iblees, if you think about it right now, Iblees is alive right now. He's alive right now. He could choose to repent even now. And Allah knows he won't. I mean, that's mind-boggling. You and I, just like we have this choice that we can ask for forgiveness, Iblees could do that right now. And yet Allah granted him that. Why did he grant him that? And this for me is one of the greatest evidences that Allah only gives you what's good for you. Because Iblees, being afforded that time, can be shown that he gave him ample opportunity to see all of creation. And perhaps he might turn back to Allah. But instead, after Allah answered his dua, and this is perhaps speaking of his mindset, he says, after Allah says, قال فإنك من المنظرين قال إنك من المنظرين. He says, قال فبما أغويتني لأقعدن لهم صراطك المستقيم ثم لآتينهم من بين أيديهم ومن خلفهم وعن أيمانهم وعن شمائلهم ولا تجد أكثرهم شاكرين. Iblees says, in that moment, he says, I'm going to what? I'm going to misguide all of them. I'm going to get my payback. So not only is his intention for why he wants that thing bad, not only is the setting bad, but the actual thing he wants to do, he wants it for a bad thing. He's asking Allah Azza wa Jal for something that he's telling Allah, I'm going to disobey you with it. But because he's asking Allah Azza wa Jal, and because he truly believes in Allah in that, well, astaghfirullah, he doesn't truly believe in Allah, but because he's asking only Allah in that moment, Allah Azza wa Jal answers him. And just like that, he proves his arrogance. He does this in order to show what? He wants to show that he was right after all. He wants to try and outsmart Allah Azza wa Jalla, astaghfirullah. He wants to prove that all of these people are going to be bad people. And then you will know why I didn't prostrate to him. So what lessons do we take from this story? When we understand if we want to be the angels or the demons, we can see the exact same things happening between the court of angels and Iblees. The angels doubted, didn't understand the command of Allah Azza wa Jal when he wanted to create Adam. They asked a question, but yet when they were asked to obey Allah Azza wa Jal, they obeyed unquestioningly. And when Allah explained it to them, they understood. Iblees had the same doubt, but his doubt didn't manifest until the moment that it proved true. The moment that actions speak louder. When he was asked to prostrate to Adam, his arrogance, his racism stopped him from doing so. A shaitanic quality that we have to rid our society of today. And we see from his actions, Allah gave him ample opportunity. He answers his dua. He gave him something which he says himself he will use for evil. Because of perhaps the opportunity might come that he might turn and reflect. But Allah knows he won't turn, and he knows in countless verses in the Quran that Iblees will be one of the first people to enter hellfire. Even though Iblees is alive right now, listening to these same words, he's chosen to take a different path. So we finish this khutbah with asking you the question: will you be an angel, or will you be a demon? The rest of this story goes on to talk about Adam alayhi salam, and how after he was created and entered into paradise, the sequence of events that followed. We as human beings choose which path we want to be. It's important for us to not only self-reflect on how we would act when truth confronts us, but to consistently and continually reevaluate our actions to ensure that we are doing the right thing. And just like Iblees reached a station that all of us would wish to reach, standing amongst angels, described as being an angel, we should always be conscious that at any moment, with any slip, we could fall right back down to the ranks of devils. Stay humble and stay committed, and inshallah, Allah will continue to forgive you and Allah will continue to guide you. Unfortunately, this is not a khutbah in the sense of a Friday prayer, so you'll still need to pray your 4 rak'ahs for Salat al-Dhuhr. Pray them in congregation, pray them with your family, because they'll count as 27 times the reward, inshaAllah. And of course, Ramadan is over, but that shouldn't mean your Quran recitation is over. That shouldn't mean that your worship is over. That shouldn't mean that your dhikr is over. Try and see which of those habits that we began in Ramadan have you continued. And inshallah, we'll try and do something brief on that next week, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Stand up and pray your 4 rak'ahs for dhuhr. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.